Blog Talk Radio.
Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. Broadcasting live presents Two Guys and a Bible with Don Preston and William Bell. Join us each week at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central as we bring you exciting, sound, challenging, and comforting messages regarding the end times. Thank you for tuning in today. Don Preston is the founder of Preterist Research Institute, or PRI. Don is a prolific author, having written and published 19 books, a host of audio and DVD studies, and is a debater and defender of the full preterist view. His websites are BibleProphecy.com, Eschatology.org, and DonKPreston.com. William Bell is the founder of AllThingsFulfilled.com Ministries and has a website bearing the same name, and has authored 3 books, audios, and DVDs. He has published hundreds of articles and recordings. And now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Two Guys and a Bible broadcast with Don Preston and William Bell. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Two Guys in the Bible right here on Fulfill Radio. And this is William Bell along with Don Preston. We are delighted to be with you today. Looking forward to another great study. And before we get started, it's always good for us to kind of chat a little bit and find out what's happening. Don, tell us, how's Oklahoma, Art Moore, and all the people out your way? What's happening in your world?
Yeah. Well, again, like it was last week, absolutely beautiful. We're enjoying some wonderful, wonderful spring weather. It got up to a little bit over 70 degrees today with, here we are in March, and normally you get these gusty winds blowing that you can't, you can't comb your hair and expect it to stay there. But I tell you, the last couple of days have just been outstanding. Now, with that said, yesterday, and you'll probably be getting this, we had rain, and we've been in the midst of pretty dry. And so it was really great. It was absolutely great because it was just a good, steady rain all day long with periods of heavy rain, but then settling back to just a good, slow, steady type of rain. And, pardon me, had a sudden yawn attack there. But nonetheless, a really, really nice rain that going to make everything just bloom out. We were already starting to see the pear trees, the red buds budding out, some really pretty trees starting to bud out and what have you. So it's that time of year. Spring has truly sprung, and I just hope that we don't have another round of just horrific cold weather that piles in on us.
Yeah, well, I can understand. We got the dogwoods blooming here in the Mid-South area, and our weather today has been good. It was a little rain this morning, so hopefully that stuff gets dumped somewhere in Arkansas before it gets to
Yeah.
But I know it's time for rain, so, that'll just make everything real nice and pretty in the coming month or so. But other than that, the weather has been great, and I've been busy. I told you I just stepped in the door. Had to go out and meet some pest control people, at one of the properties, and was scheduled to see 2. And then, they had to call the fire department today. Well, they didn't have to. They could have called me, but for some reason, I don't know whether they said they couldn't get me. But almost tore one of the doors off the house because the lady locked herself inside the house. But I think the problem, then she dropped the key outside. I don't know what happened. But at any rate, I think it was more of one of those little latches that caught the door and, she couldn't open it. So I spent the day over there, doing electrical work and fooling with doorknobs and things like that.
So you came to the rescue.
Yeah, that's about the story. I have to come to the rescue all the time unless I want to spend some money. And then I still end up spending some, so at least I save a little bit because my labor is cheap.
Yes, I understand exactly what you mean. That's kind of like my old cars. When I'm working on these old cars, I could hire somebody to do it, but the cost would be serious money, and my labor's awfully cheap. And in fact, somebody asked me years ago. They said, "How much money do you make when you restore an old car?" And we're talking suspension work, we're talking interior work, we're talking motor, we're talking, just everything. And I said, well, if you want to talk about how much money I've got in my pocket after it's sold, it sounds pretty impressive. But I said, if you count up the hours of the labor that I put in it, and I did this on one occasion. By the time I bought all of my parts, by the time I did all of my labor, and I sold it, I made 25 cents an hour. So I think you could say that is not a winning proposition.
Yeah, well, I know exactly what you're talking about because my mind figures up about the same when I get to doing all the stuff that I have to do. So I know precisely what you mean.
But it's a lot of fun. It's relaxation for me. Although when I come in and my hands are all scuffed up, sometimes they're bloody, or like it was Saturday, I came in, my hands were really, really dark. They were almost black. I couldn't find any rubber gloves, and I was spreading rust preventative on some areas, some new metal that I had welded in, and she took one look at my hands and she just shook her head, because once you get that stuff on your hands, even lacquer thinner won't take it off. If you let it stay on for as much as 5 minutes, it literally has to grow off. And my hands are still tinted dark, and they're better than they were, but they are tinted dark in some areas. But again, it's what I love doing, and I come in sometimes, like I said, I come in with my hands all scuffed up, they're bloody, and she said, "How can that be fun?" I said, "Because it is. It's what I like to do." And she said, "Well, I just don't see how that can be fun when you're scraping your knuckles, you're busting your knuckles, you're cutting yourself." I said, "Well, I don't pay attention to that kind of stuff. I pay attention to what I'm accomplishing. And I'm taking a car from a rusted up Hulk that will barely pull itself down the road into a really, really pretty car that's reliable for someone." Well, okay. I just don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's like taking a old rundown house and turning it into something that people want to live in. And when it's done,
right,
you can stand back and look at it and say, "Wow, that's pretty good." I'll never forget.
That's right. That's exactly right.
When years ago, before Tasha moved in her first house, I had my grandmother's house, and it had run down after she was ill and passed on. And so she went over and looked at it. She says, "I would never live in this house." Well, Don, by the time I got through with it, guess who the first person at the door was? Lined up to and she did. She lived in it for a while. It was nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's the real reason we do these things. Take what looks like chaos and a mess and then turn it into something that's desirable, and that's the appreciation.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, this has been a good week, and I will send you via email or through Facebook or something. I was contacted by a minister from Ghana who said that he wanted to be able to partner with us. And so I don't really know his background. I don't really know hardly anything about him at all, except he sent me a picture of the front of his assembly and told me that he definitely wanted to try to partner with us as much as possible. So since you have some good contacts over there, Since you have some brethren that you're working with very closely, it's very distinctly possible that they can contact him. I don't know what part of the country he's from. I don't know any details about it except for the fact that he contacted me via Facebook this morning expressing that interest. So I'll pass that information along to you. Perhaps Solomon Bido or Raymond can get a hold of him, make some contact with him, and determine what his real interest is. So it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I'll be interested in finding out, who it is and where he's from. See if, as you say, Solomon or Raymond knows him, or any of the contacts that we have there are aware of who he is, and just see what he wants to do and see if we can make something happen. I know that there's interest picking up Ghana and several other places, South Africa particularly, and other places quite a bit recently, and they were very, very enthused to hear about the expansion into 83 new countries, most of which, was the continent of Africa. And so that may be generating, a bit of excitement as well.
That's right. And I read an awful lot of the comments when you posted the notice about how Now TV is expanding so much and so rapidly. And there was genuine interest and excitement and enthusiasm on the part of an awful lot of people that commented on that. And of course, I posted it on my on my Facebook page as well, and it generated the same kind of interest, the same kind of excitement. And so, it's really, really fascinating, and it's so gratifying when you let people know what's going on and the growth that is taking place, of how excited they are. I got a couple of private messages from people in Australia wondering, okay, are they expanding into Australia? When do we get Now TV in Australia? And all I could tell them was, I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. So that remains to be seen if that does happen. But obviously there's already some interest there. And so we'll literally have to see what happens in that regard. But we can hope and pray, and we can work toward that end, of course, and try to be prepared for it when it does happen. So that's just some more of the exciting stuff that happens. I've been contacted by 4 or 5 people just since Saturday that are brand new preterists and trying to get a little bit of clarification on this and that or the other. But nonetheless, they're people who told me they're brand new preterists, and that they're very, very excited about where they are in their studies and in their travel with the Lord. So, yeah, exciting things, exciting stuff.
Well, that's great. That's great. I know we got some new books coming down the pike. I think you've got 1 or 2 that you're releasing pretty soon. Holger Neubauer is working on one, and maybe there's some others as well. But that's also going to be good because it'll just add to the library of materials that are already out there. And again, will give a means for generations to come to do the research and, discover what took us years, decades to discover. They can get it in 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes if they, take advantage of all the resources that they have. And that's exciting, that there is an abundance of materials that has been prepared and created for, that purpose. And, people definitely will go back and search it out. And, what I'm just kind of waiting on and hope I would live to see it is when the momentum curve really turns up and this becomes, this just starts to catch on like wildfire. I think, we're seeing some of that in little pockets and places because,
yes,
there's a lot more interest coming. But, I'd like to see it really, really take off, and maybe that will happen, sometime in years to come. I think it'll be an exciting time when it does.
Yes, I'm confident that it's going to happen for sure. I have no doubt. People have asked me from time to time, They say, well, Dom, look at what happened when John Darby caused the literal explosion of dispensationalism in America. And it just swept across America. Why can't we see that same kind of explosion of covenant eschatology? And I try to explain to them and say, listen, we are living in totally different times from that of John Darby. In the days when John Darby was alive. And look, I categorically, emphatically disagree with this theology, as do you. You have to give it to the guy. He was persistent. He was courageous. He was dogged. He would literally walk into a town, go from preacher to preacher of the different denominations in town, just simply asking them if they would study with him. In most towns, they absolutely refused to study with him. In some towns, John Darby was literally, not metaphorically, literally tarred and feathered and run out of town for his heresy. Never deterred him, never bothered him, never distracted him. He just kept going, kept going, kept going, kept going. And everyone knows that right now, Darbyism, dispensationalism, is still the dominant eschatological view in American Christianity, much to the shame, I would add, in my opinion, much to the shame of the ministers who have bought into it without exercising proper due diligence and understanding proper hermeneutic and proper exegesis. But all of that said, I explained to people, you're talking about the time in which John Darby lived, in which people didn't have social media. People didn't have television. They didn't have Netflix. They didn't have a gazillion and one avenues and venues of entertainment. They didn't have sports like we have today. When they came in from the field, when they came in from their work, what they did is they grabbed their Bible. They studied. They read the Bible to their family. They talked about the Bible. And reading the Bible, now, we can talk all day long about their lack of understanding of the Greek, their lack of understanding of the Hebraic culture, their lack of resources. But nonetheless, there was a greater hunger for an understanding of the Word of God when John Darby was alive and active than there is today, as I just mentioned. I mean, we've got every possible avenue for entertainment that a person could possibly desire. Now, look, I love sports. I love Arkansas Razorback, basketball, football, etc. And right now I'm kind of on a sports high because my Razorbacks are in the Sweet 16 in basketball for the first time literally in 25 years. So I'm really living it up right now, just really enjoying it. I will be glued to the TV this Saturday evening to watch the Razorbacks. Well, again, in John Darby's day, they didn't have any television. They didn't have any radio. They had no computers. They had nothing. But they had a desire to know the Bible. And as misguided as Darby was, he tapped into that desire. And he gave the people his own personally derived hermeneutic based upon this supposed vision of a young woman named MacDonald, which was a joke from the very beginning. But nonetheless, John Darby tapped to that hunger to know the Word of God. They were living at a time in which there was an unbridled respect for the Word of God. we're living in a day, in a time, in which, pardon me, if the Bible or Christianity is mentioned at all on television, it's by way of ridicule. It's to say how radical, how dangerous, how illogical, foolish, and stupid Christians are. They're a threat to America. And the very idea that the Bible is the inspired Word of God is not even in the discussion insofar as the social media and the public domain is concerned, as far as the entertainment world is concerned. And again, we have our computers, we have our televisions, we have so many different venues in which to seek entertainment. And so the very fact that Christianity is continuing to grow, and the very fact that covenant eschatology is growing, is an amazing reality, because that tells us people are still looking for answers to the questions concerning eschatology. And folks, I don't know if you are aware of this or not, but this is a historical reality. In spite of the fact that the historical creeds studied, discussed, debated everything under the sun, pneumatology, Christology, ecclesiology, etc., not one single ancient creed undertook to debate and to discuss eschatology. As some scholars have said, eschatology is the last great unexplored domain, arena, and subject for the creeds to investigate. And yet it hasn't been done. And so what we're involved with, and that's spreading covenant eschatology on a grassroots level, spreading covenant eschatology by the books. And like here on Two Guys in the Bible, here on Fulfilled Radio, we're doing this in what can be termed a small way, but comparatively speaking, compared to what John Darby did, it is a universal platform that we've got. And that is absolutely amazing. And it's absolutely wonderful. And it's absolutely thrilling and exciting. And oh, by the way, you mentioned books. I didn't realize that Holger was almost finished with another book. That's good. And I do have another book that's almost ready. I ordered the proof copy for my book, Circumcision in the New Creation ? I ordered the proof copy for it today. Scott Fisher, my friend, who just recently, by the way, moved to Nashville, William. But anyway, he finished proofreading it, and he finished generating my scripture index, sent it back to me. I went over the changes that he made, and I submitted the manuscript to the publisher today, and went ahead and paid the money. I'm supposed to get the proof copy in by Friday. And so needless to say, yes, I am very, very excited about this book. It is a book of about approximately 240 pages, so it's a major book. It explores a great number of topics and subjects and themes and motifs that are inextricably and inseparably bound up with the subject of circumcision. And a lot of people may wonder, and I say this at the very beginning of the book, in the preface and on the back page, why would anybody write a book on circumcision in this modern age? Is that not an arcane, obsolete type of subject? Well, in response, I would say, how important is the study of eschatology? And everyone agrees it's important. How important is the doctrine of justification by faith? How important is the doctrine of the role of the law of Moses today under the new covenant? Well, everybody, I think, would agree, those are extremely important subjects. Well, every one of those subjects is inextricably bound up with the study of circumcision. So if we admit that the study of salvation by grace through faith versus justification by works, if we admit that that's an extremely critical doctrine, then we ought to be able to understand why the subject of circumcision is important to study. So I'm very excited about this book. Pardon me. I was very, very thrilled to hear Scott Fisher's review of the book, his verbal review, when discussing it with me. He was very, very thrilled about it. And I won't use all the adjectives that he did, but nonetheless, he was very kind in his description, or I should say in his review of the book, and I'm very, very appreciative of that. So, like I said, I'm very excited to get this book in hand, and I just hope and pray that the proof copy is acceptable, and the minute it is acceptable, then I will go ahead and say to the publisher, roll the presses, and we'll go from there. So, yeah, I'm excited.
Well, that's very good to hear, and always good to have some new and refreshing great books. I know that you have given some indication of, the subject matter in the book, even during these studies that we've been holding on the book of Ezekiel and some of the later chapters there. So that will be some fascinating information and studies, and I hope that, it will be a blessing to many out there who, will take the opportunity to read the book. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well. I know that there are a lot of great things that will be said there. And, you were talking about all the distractions that, people have today in view of the spread of Christianity, of covenant eschatology in particular. And I think about it, you look at these kids are almost, they have doctorate degrees in these games that are, that are published and that they play. And they spend hours and hours of time on them at a very early age. Now, it's not to say that these games are bad. I've actually heard some research on them that, their brains develop, and their IQs improve, et cetera. So there is some good in them. We're not trying to dismiss them all, but at the same time, some of these games are raising these children, and because they become a convenient way for the parents to say, okay, go play your game, and that's it. Yeah. But the whole idea of that, and the other side of that, which I learned, is that the parents are playing these games almost as much as the kids are. And so that is definitely, one of the things that is distracting people from doing study. But in the midst of all of that, you have those who are not, as who do not have that kind of technology and accessibility to all of this modern technology. Those are the ones who seem to be doing a lot more study on their own and really focused on the Bible. Good thing. And that's the way it was in some of those, earlier years where they didn't have these distractions. They had a lot of time to focus on the Bible, and they did. But because of the internet, as you've said before, because of, the access that we've got through all of this technology, and people can get access to it faster, they can learn faster and absorb, and then at the same time take it and, teach it, because much of it is put in a very organized way. And that's good as well, because it takes, less time to, organize your ideas and thoughts about it. And you could actually, pick up an outline and begin presenting it.
Yeah. And it's always so encouraging and thrilling when you hear from people who are taking advantage of the material that is available. And as you said, when you and I started out, we did not have these resources, ladies and gentlemen. William and I didn't have 34 books by some guy named Preston, and we certainly didn't have the internet. We didn't have the resources that we've got. We had ourselves, and William and I certainly studied a lot together on the phone at the time, and we still do that, and not as often as we did, but we certainly still bounce ideas off of each other on the phone or on the internet and what have you. So, pardon me. When you look at the resources that are available, I got an email just this week already. I got an email yesterday from a gentleman from the Martha's Vineyard area. And he had corresponded with me somewhat before, telling me what a place Martha's Vineyard was, telling me what a blessing my books had been, and that he uses them. He has a congregation there in the Martha's Vineyard area. And he said, as you can well imagine, we live here in the Northeast in a very secular environment. But he said, nonetheless, we have a group here at my little church that I preach for. And he said they're very excited about studying the Word. And so this email that I got from him yesterday, perhaps today, I'm real bad on remembering times like that. Anyway, he said, I thought I would just share with you that I guess I got it today, because he said, I shared with my congregation yesterday some lessons from your book, Torah to Telos, on the passing of the law of Moses, and specifically your material on Jeremiah 31, 29 to 31. And he said, I have to tell you, the congregation was incredibly excited because they had never, ever heard any of this before, but it makes so much sense. And he said, one of the things that was so exciting to me was the fact, one individual, and he said, now you have to understand, we get tremendous numbers of people in as visitors to our congregation that are not regular members. And he said, we get them all year round. Of course, during the summer, we get all sorts of snowbirds, if you please. But he said this particular individual was not a member of our church, but they said, you know what? I've always taken Jeremiah 31 to speak of a yet future third or second new covenant. The gospel is the first new covenant, but, the Jeremiah covenant is the third new covenant. But he said, what you just presented completely blew that away. And he said, Don, I had heard you teach before that dispensationalists say that the gospel is not the promised new covenant. And he said, very first time I heard you say it, I just didn't know about that because I had never met anybody who said that. But he said, this was my very first time to hear somebody openly state they didn't think previous to yesterday or the Sunday, they didn't think the gospel was the Jeremiah New Covenant, but with the material that I presented from your book, they had become convinced the gospel is, after all, the promised New Covenant of Jeremiah 31. Well, look, I had never heard of this guy until they emailed me. And it's kind of exciting. He's invited Jan and me to come take a vacation up there, to get ourselves up there, and they'll take us sightseeing up there in the Martha's Vineyard area, take us some places where we can take advantage of some of that fantastic fresh seafood, fresh off of the ocean there on the coast and what have you. And so I don't know if we'll ever do that or not. Jan and I were actually talking about it today, and we were talking about what an incredibly long trip that is to drive, and she doesn't want to fly anymore. So I don't know if we'll ever make the trip or not. But nonetheless, it's exciting to hear things like that. And here's this guy that I'd never even heard of before until over the last couple of months of him using my material and then telling me about what had happened on Sunday about sharing the material, and it absolutely was convincing to the people that heard it. So, yeah, that's really exciting stuff.
Very good. Always great to hear those kind of stories and the feedback from people who are getting some results those who are digging in and studying. And I've been just amazed by some of the people that I've, worked with, and, who's studying. And we've sort of delved in a couple of, deep passages. And, man, they are hanging in there just as tough as they can, contributing. And that's really exciting to start getting the feedback from people. And I don't mean just, telling me this is a time statement. I'm talking about people who are really digging in and trying to figure out, what some of these hard passages are all about, and coming up with some pretty good results. So, that is exciting as well. And it just lets you know that, there's a future that doesn't depend on a few men who have, spent their life studying this, but you've got others who are digging in and who recognize what some of the tough issues are so that they're able to tackle them as well. And that's good. You make them aware of them. Even if we don't get all the answers now, we get them aware of them so they know, how to handle the situations as they come up. And that's good.
Oh, it is. It's absolutely great. All right. Well, we spent some time sharing with some of the news, some of the stuff that's going on in our respective worlds and what have you. So we get back to Ezekiel chapter 47, and the issue of the land promise is one that has really, really, really perplexed the Christian world. See, about 4 or 5 days ago, and again, I don't remember time very well like that, but 4 or 5 days ago, on my YouTube channel, there was an individual, because I had made the comment in one of my videos that the Israel of today is not the Israel of the Old Testament. They are not national Israel. And this individual responded and said, well, national Israel was restored in 1948. What is your response to that? And what does that mean for preterism? Well, I pointed out that, again, that the Israel that was, quote, restored in 1948 is not the Israel of Torah. It is Talmudic. It is secular. And as a matter of fact, according to some estimates, the nation that was established in 1948, 85%. Now, these are the figures that were given by Thomas Ice, Arnold Fruchtenbaum, and Tim LaHaye. They all agreed 85% of the nation that was established in 1985 were, this is their quote, this is Arnold Fruchtenbaum's own quote. Pardon me. They were atheists, agnostics, and unbelievers. Now, it is really, really, really amazing that anyone would make an argument that a nation that was preponderantly atheist was in the majority agnostic and in the great majority unbelievers. It is incredible to me that anyone would attempt to argue that God blessed that people in that state of rebellion, immorality, and unbelief by restoring them as a nation. That runs so counter to the scriptural teaching that it's absolutely amazing. So this guy comes back and he says, well, how do you respond to the fact that Israel is back in the land? Well, I did, before I could ever respond, because I was so preoccupied, before I could ever respond, there were some folks on there who said, if you think that Israel today possesses all of the land that was promised to them, you have never examined the land promises that were actually given in Genesis 15. Israel possesses a small sliver of the land promises. Well, that individual has pretty well disappeared from the discussion. But before they did, I posted a link to my book, Israel 1948, Countdown to Nowhere. And I told the individual, I said, Israel had already been given all of the land before 1948. And they were destroyed in 1948. And you could tell this individual either they were not going to listen to a thing that we said, or they were pondering what we said, completely disappeared from the discussion. But this issue of the land, really, it continues to be hotly debated in Christianity today. The dispensationalists tell us Israel has never possessed all of the land. Now, I would say to those individuals who claim that Israel has never possessed all of the land that was promised to her, they really have not done the kind of study that they need to. Again, let me recommend my book, Israel 1948, Countdown to Nowhere. In that book, and by the way, I have a 6-disc DVD series on Israel and the land promises that I produced some years ago. I used that DVD series as the ground for my book, but there's more information, in each one of them. Each one of them has distinctive information in it. But what I demonstrate in both of those works, and they're both available on my website, donkpreston.com or BibleProphecy.com. What I demonstrate in that book is that during the period of conquest, God said that he had given Israel all of the land. Joshua chapter 24, 43 to 45. During the period of the United Kingdom, God said he had given Israel all of the land. Matter of fact, in 2 Kings chapter 4, 20 and 21, where it says Solomon ruled over all of the land, and the boundaries are given of the territory that Solomon reigned over. And as many scholars have noted, the boundaries that are given in 2 Kings chapter 4, 20 and 21 are actually larger than the original land promise given in Genesis 15. So not only did God keep his promise to give Israel the land, he gave them more than he promised.
That's 1 Kings.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, it is. 1 Kings chapter 4. And so here you have, in the period of conquest, God gave them all the land. The period of the United Kingdom, they possessed all the land and more than they were promised. After captivity, after Babylonian captivity, Nehemiah chapter 9, Nehemiah rehearses the land promises given in Genesis chapter 15 and says, you promised to give the land of the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, etc., and you have kept your word. Not a word of your promise has failed. Now that's after that's after the Babylonian captivity, in which Nehemiah was saying, you promised to give us the land, you kept your promise. Jeremiah chapter 32 says the same thing, essentially, even before the Babylonian captivity, about how God kept his land promises to Israel. And so, at every critical juncture of Israel's existence, we are told that Israel had possessed the land, all of the land that had been given. And it's been my experience, William, that when dispensationalists, good, honest, and sincere dispensationalists, who have really honestly done nothing but sit in the audience and listen to men like Thomas Ice, or Tim LaHaye, Arnold Fruchtenbaum, any of the leading dispensationalists. All they've done, and I'm not impugning their integrity. I'm not impugning them as Bible students. They trust their preachers. Unfortunately, in this case, these Bible ministers have not taught them the truth. Not at all. And so it's been my experience that when they have seen this testimony from the Word of God, this explicit testimony of the fulfillment of the land promises, it has literally blown them away. And I've had any number of dispensationalists just simply say, I had no idea this was in the Bible. They were not taught that. They were taught exactly the opposite. They were just simply taught, without scriptural justification, without scriptural support, Israel has never possessed the land. And therefore, they've got to possess the land. And so we had men such as Pat Robertson saying the times of the Gentiles ended in 1967. And therefore, a generation from 1967 ought to have seen, guess what? The return of the Lord. Didn't happen. We've been told when Israel would be back in the land, restored as a nation, that generation would see the coming of the Lord. Well, Israel was, quote, Israel, unquote, was restored in 1948. A generation biblically is 40 years. So let's see, 1948, 40 years, 1988. And by the way, this is why Edgar Whisenant said 88 reasons why the rapture will be in 1988. Oops. Oh, wait. I'm sorry. Let me recalculate, Whisenant said. So he goes back, he recalculates, he finds another year, writes another little book, which sold millions of copies, that said 89 reasons why the rapture will be in 1989. If it was in 1988 or 1989, you and I both missed out there, William. And everybody that we know missed out. In fact, everybody missed out. And so Edgar Whisenant kind of disappears off the scene. Of course, no telling how much money he made off of selling millions and millions of copies of his fear-mongering books. But here's the point. We've been told that Israel in the land is the super sign of the end. That's what Thomas Ice and Tim LaHaye called it in their book, Charting the End Times. 1948 super sign of the end. Well, it's really interesting. I have laying on my desk right now and written in my hand in great big bold black magic marker is the word wow, 3 exclamation points. And the reason it is because this article poses the question to the dispensational world, were we wrong about 1948? And the article begins with saying, the dispensational world was all a Twitter. We were just so excited with the reestablishment of Israel in 1948. This was the super sign of the end. And yet, even though we taught that a generation is 40 years, and we believe that to be accurate, it didn't happen. The end didn't come in 1948. And he said, I, along with an awful lot of other Christians, were extremely disappointed, if not disillusioned. And he admits an awful lot of dispensationalists lost their faith over that. So what does he try to do? He tries to say, well, yes, it does remain as the super sign of the end, but maybe we've got to rethink our definition of generation. Maybe it's not a time span after all. Maybe it simply has to do with a kind of people. In other words, Jesus was saying, this kind of people will not pass away until all these things are fulfilled. In other words, he completely radically alters this generation from being a time statement to being a statement about a certain kind of people. It's just amazing. But what's the point? They recognize that their predictions of 1948 completely failed. And that somehow, some way, they have to come up with an explanation. They fail to consider that maybe those land promises were fulfilled long ago, and that maybe, just maybe, maybe, just maybe, the literal physical land was typological of a greater spiritual reality instead of being the end or the goal of the prophecies. They put all of their stock, all of their hope on the shadows, the types, instead of the reality. All of that said, well, we're almost out of time here. William, do you want to jump in here with any observations before we get into Ezekiel 47 and what it has to say about the land promises?
Yeah, well, it's so very, very interesting. You know, you and I have been having conversations about the Pharisees and their beliefs in resurrection, et cetera, and what those particular beliefs was. And I've had, or where I had some conversations with some other guys that, you know, we've been studying with as well. And I did a study this past Sunday, you know, as we were dealing with some objections that are being raised on 1 Corinthians 15. But very clearly in this, in these land promises, we have the restoration of Israel involved, and where, you know, they were to be regathered into the land in terms of fulfilling the land promises. But right along with those land promises comes the subject of resurrection. They are indivisible. So yes. you cannot separate the land promise from the promise of resurrection, especially as you look in, Ezekiel 36, 37, and Hosea 1 and 2. And, you know, you went back to 1 Kings to talk about the land, but you got 2 Kings 16 through 18. And so there are those resurrection promises. And not only that, but this was the time Israel was to be converted and walk in all of God's statutes, as well as cleansing them from all their sins. So when you put all that together, you think about that in 1948 and ask yourself, you know, was Israel cleansed from their sins at that time, from all their uncleanness and all their filthiness? Did that take place in 1948? Were they converted so that they walk in the statutes of God, or do they have laws over there that say you can't even teach them about Christianity? And was the dead raised at the time that they were brought back into the land? And that's a question that, you know, even our, you know, friendly futurist brethren have to deal with, because if they're going to talk about resurrection, they need to talk about the restoration of Israel to the land as well.
Amen.
One of the questions that Peter asked on, prior to Jesus' ascension was, will you at this time restore the kingdom? And he particularly tied the response of that to that day that no man knows the day and hour, which, of course, they're going to say is the second coming. And, of course, they'd be right on that from that perspective. But they got to deal with the land and the restoration of that to Israel. So there's a lot riding on this issue of, restoring them to the land from the perspective of what takes place in the last days. Of course, we know that the original promise that God gave them that you were developing and discussing that Solomon, that's recorded in First Kings. But then even after there were land promises that God spoke of, and then how are we going to reconcile those land promises with the resurrection, et cetera? I just think it just makes for a great discussion, some very interesting conversations for those who want to talk about resurrection, especially 1 Corinthians 15 and 1 Thessalonians 4, et cetera. All our great resurrection passages, we cannot exclude the regathering of Israel, restoration of Israel, etc., from those promises. And how does that work with all the teachings that we find in futurist eschatology as well as dispensationalism?
Well, those are some absolutely fantastic points, and they're they're spot on. And in my book, Paul on Trial, Paul the Pharisees and the Resurrection, I tied an awful lot of those things together, as you well know. I was sharing with someone just the other day. Pardon me. I don't remember if it was you that I was discussing this with. I don't think it was, William. But I was sharing with him the fact that, biblically speaking, the Great Tribulation, no, it's in one of my films, one of my videos, biblically speaking, and a book that does an absolutely incredible job of illustrating this, proving this, the Great Tribulation in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Great Tribulation is absolutely inseparably bound up with the doctrine of the resurrection. The resurrection would come directly after, immediately after the Great Tribulation. Now, as I pointed out in this video, the problem that this presents for the amillennialist and the postmillennialist, and I pointed out in this video, oh yeah, I remember exactly what happened now. I did an entire Now TV video the other day, William, and man, when I was through, it was one of those where you're going, that was really good. That was good. Okay, so I logged off. When I came back in, the computer had eaten that video.
Oh, wow.
It disappeared. And I have tried to find a way to retrieve that. And it's just simply not there. And Jan said, well, can you remember what you said? And I said, are you kidding?
They have no clue what that feels like and what that experience is like. And I have been there more than once. Right.
I mean, when it's gone, it is gone. So anyway, I made the observation. Brent Petrie, who is a great, great scholar. He's a Catholic. I obviously disagree with a great deal of his theology. But in his book, Jesus, the Tribulation, and the End of Exile, he does a fantastic job documenting from passage after passage after passage. And, of course, as I mentioned a moment ago, in my book, Daniel, the Resurrection of Daniel, chapter 12, verse 2, Future or Fulfilled, I documented as well. And in my book, Paul on Trial, Paul the Pharisees and the Resurrection, I tie it in somewhat as well. But the fact, folks, you've got to pay attention here. As I like to say, you got to catch the power of this. In the amillennial and in the postmillennial world, it is taught almost without fail that the Great Tribulation occurred in the first century prior to consummating in the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. That's just a given in amillennial and postmillennial circles. Yet where do they put the resurrection? Oh, at the end of time, somewhere off in our future. So they put the resurrection 2,000 years removed and separated and divorced from, number one, what William was just saying, they divorced the resurrection from the restoration of Israel, from the restoration to the land, i.e. the dwelling place of God. They divorce it all from that, and they divorce it from the Great Tribulation, and it cannot be divorced from those events. This is a complex series of themes and subjects and motifs that are all biblically interrelated with one another. Unfortunately, we're out of time tonight. We can't go any further with this. Perhaps we can pick it up later. So in the meantime, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us here on Two Guys in a Bible on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. William, great to be with you. And with that, I will say good night. God bless.
Thank you for joining the Two Guys in a Bible radio broadcast. On behalf of Dunn Preston and myself, we'd like to say have a very pleasant day, and may God bless. Until next time, we'll see you on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust.